Thank you, Senator. Senator Ludlam.
Acting Deputy President. I rise this afternoon to make some observations about cycling in Western Australia and in my home city of Perth in particular. There are very few experiences more frustrating than sitting in a crushing traffic jam. I live in Perth, WA, which is one of the most car-dependent cities in the world. While the state government is still sucking down hundreds of millions of dollars in Commonwealth transport funding to add extra lanes to our freeways and effectively just make our traffic jams wider, I think Perth and the residents of Perth are looking for a different transport future. Public transport is obviously a very big part of this, and I've spoken at length about our light rail proposal and getting more out of our bus system. Getting freight off roads and onto rail is also a big piece of the picture, as is high-frequency train services and better land use planning to bring people closer to jobs and services. But today I want to talk about something simpler, bringing back the bike. Not just as some kind of marginal afterthought in our transport planning and thinking, but as a central element of transport planning, giving us an alternative to the private car, reducing obesity and keeping us fit, improving air quality, and perhaps most importantly of all, providing us with a more enjoyable way of getting from A to B. We know the benefits, the statistics are very familiar, but for some reason we only spend, at a state and a Commonwealth level, an absolute pittance on cycling. And it's though somehow, and I've spent many sessions in budget estimates trying to unpick the thinking behind the total absence of Commonwealth spending on cycling, it's seen as though this is it's not seen as infrastructure for grown-ups. Your grown-ups do freeways and freight rail and ports, but cycling somehow is seen as being something not serious enough to really bother with. At a state level, and West Australian regional towns are really no better, the Perth bicycle network is half built, it's poorly maintained, it's disconnected, it's fragmented and it's patently dangerous in some parts. Instead of a well-connected network allowing people to get safely from anywhere to anywhere without mixing it up with fast-moving motorised traffic, it's as though parts of the Perth bike network were written in Morse code, just bits and pieces of bike lane that disappear and reappear again totally at random. And this really matters. The biggest reason given for not cycling, and particularly for parents choosing or being justifiably unwilling to send their kids out to school on bikes, is safety. And the fact is, in Perth we have some of the world's worst practice going on right now. We force cyclists to share road space with fast-moving motorised traffic, and this kills and injures people. In a collision between a car and a cyclist, the cyclist will always come off second best. One thing we do have in Western Australia is an abundance of good cycling advocates, and so there's every reason to believe that we're on our way to turning the situation around, and there are certainly some signs of hope. Over the last 12 months or so, my office has been working with, I think, some of the best cycling advocates in the country, particularly in Perth with Heinrich Benz of the Bicycle Transport Alliance, with Clint Shaw of Westcycle, Marion Carey of the RAC, which is now, as this lobby is doing around the country, the RAC is doing really useful and important work on mobility and seeing mobility as a much bigger picture than simply being able to drive your car. And so I congratulate in WA the RAC for the leadership position that they've taken. Gary Chandler from Cycling WA and Jeremy Murray from Bicycling WA. Nationally, we've been working with Stephen Hodge, who's a tireless advocate through his work in the Cycling Promotion Fund. And I also wanted to mention Harry Barber from the Bicycle Network Victoria, who I had the good fortune to meet when he was briefly in Western Australia earlier this year. I couldn't go without mentioning Lynn McLaren MLC, our state transport colleague in Western Australia, who also cares a lot about safety for cyclists and about creating a sustainable cycling network for our city. And what we've been doing over the last year or so, particularly Chantal Caruso in my office, who's really worked very, very hard to pull this together, is to produce a plan for what we were hoping the state government would actually do, a costed proposal to not only finish the Perth bike network but to make it world-class. So as our city grows, to make sure we're not forgetting cyclists and leaving them behind, but also going back and retrofitting, backfitting those parts of the city in which we've almost intentionally designed cyclists out of the transport picture. So the proposal and the purpose is to harness the potential that Perth has got of this bike plan to become one of the best cities in the world, and certainly one of the best in the country for cycling. We have some of the best weather of anywhere in the country, flat topography. We've got perfect circumstances for really making a serious go at being the best cycling city in the world. The idea and the outcomes effectively that we're looking for, and we've chosen our target date of the year 2029, is that 29% of all trips would be made by bike. Currently that level's about 6%, and 15% mode share by the year 2029, and that is commuter cycling. That is how people get to work. And at the moment in Perth, it's less than 1.5% of people choosing to get to work by bike. This can change. Our target is to really raise these up. Funding for cycling should reflect these aspirational targets, and we want a dedicated proportion of the state and federal transport budgets to be allocated to cycling. Our state transport target arrived at with Lynn McLaren MLC is 3%. And for this, if you were to do that, if you were just to hive off 3% of the state transport budget for cycling, here's what you could do. We could deliver around 6,500 kilometres of safe and, most importantly, separated bike lanes and paths that cover around 50% of our roads by the year 2029. This could be done. If you look at how it would be incrementally done over a period of years, 300 kilometres of principal shared paths. So these, we've effectively, these are the cycling highways. These are the commuter freeways for getting rapidly from A to B. The Perth Bicycle Network has half of this plan completed, so filling a gap of nearly 140 kilometres and then adding new routes to fill in the principal shared path network. At least 2,000 kilometres of local bike routes, and this is the backbone of the system that allows people to get from place to place. Again, the Perth Bike Network is half finished, and it's time that we completed that job. A new 2,000 kilometre network of protected crosstown bike paths. So this is again not just looking at the needs of motorists getting from place to place, but how cyclists want to get from suburb to suburb, or from activity centres to shops or to places of work. Located mostly on district distributor, that is sub-arterial roads to connect neighbourhoods together. Perhaps most importantly, a new network of 1,800 kilometres of safe routes to schools, also taking in railway stations, taking in major employment hubs, but schools are where we want to really focus on. We are at risk of losing a whole generation of kids to the joy of the bike. That is something that we can fix, but parents need to be given the confidence, and kids need to be given the confidence that they will not be sharing road space with fast-moving motorised traffic. So safe routes to school is an absolutely key component of the plan that we're releasing. And lastly, an entirely new 120-kilometre greenways network of safe, continuous, separate bikeways running through some of Perth's spectacular natural bushland assets, the parklands and the wetlands that are so valuable, those remaining areas of urban bushland that remain on the Swan Coastal Plain. So that is the vision, that's the plan that we want to be able to deliver by 2029, and again, you can do that with 3% of the state's transport budget. That comes to around $64.2 million per year. A federal funding component, and it's very, very important that we remember not to let the Commonwealth Government off the hook here, and again, this is something that Greens have been pursuing and working on, certainly since well before I got here. The fact that there is no Commonwealth appropriation for cycling is an absolute scandal. We are being ripped off. Millions of Australians enjoy getting out on their bikes, but they are not confident that it's necessarily going to be safe to do so, and it is absolutely no longer appropriate for the Commonwealth to sit back and expect local governments in the states and territories to pick up the slack. It's absolutely urgent that we get a Commonwealth cycling appropriation in place. Now, we have proposed and put to Treasury last year an $80 million national cycling fund. Here's the scandal. The only way at the moment that you can get the Commonwealth to be interested in a bike lane, in putting a cycle lane in anywhere in the country, is if it's next to a freeway. So if you've got a freeway proposal costing billions of dollars, yes, we can make it 3 feet wider and stick a bike lane, and maybe if you're lucky, we'll paint a line down the side of the road. And again, what we're noticing in Perth, this is world's worst practice. This is how not to protect cyclists. Under no circumstances, if you've got high volumes of traffic moving very quickly along a freeway, should you paint a white line on the side of that road and tell cyclists to share that road space with traffic. That is what is causing injuries and indeed deaths. So there are much better ways of doing this. We've got plenty of examples of good practice here in Australia and some wonderful examples from around the world of how to do this well. So we want an $80 million Commonwealth Cycling Fund, and we will be taking that proposal into the next budget cycle, as we have done for the previous two. And we know that this can work because one of the lesser known components of the government stimulus package passed and modified with the support of the Greens was the $40 million cycle package. And the reason that I say it's little known is that it was not scandal-plagued, it worked. No bad news came out of it, it wasn't on the front page of any papers, but it produced hundreds of kilometres of new cycling infrastructure. It was very well regarded, and apart from some useful critiques raised by the Auditor-General in their recent report, it's something that we think should be scaled up and made a standing appropriation. And finally, local government funding. Local government already picks up the vast majority of cycle funding in this country, and we want to acknowledge that, but we also want to provide sources of matched funding so that our local governments can actually get on with the job. Now, if you total that up for Western Australia pro rata, that amounts to a fund of $80 million per year. So a fair chunk of that going to a Perth bike network and the remainder going to regional cycling infrastructure gets you the 6,500 kilometres, a fully integrated cycling network for the city of Perth that will actually genuinely look after the interests of cyclists. Now, as well as the advocates that I mentioned earlier, we've spent a huge amount of time working with people in Perth who actually use the bike network, such as it is. And 6 months or so ago, my colleague Rachel Pemberton developed an iPhone app to crowdsource bike black spots. And if you visit bikeblackspot.org, you can actually see it working. So we launched this earlier in the year in Perth, but we've also launched it across Australia, in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in regional centres, including, I was going to say Hobart, but that would probably get me into trouble, but certainly including Geraldton and Newcastle. And you can see, if you visit that URL, you'll actually see it working. You can photograph the black spot, the place where the network has just tried to spit you into fast-moving traffic, or where there might be a maintenance issue, or you can photograph an area that actually really works for you, a piece of network that works. It sends that photograph, it sends any notes that you add, and it sends your location to the Transport Minister, Anthony Albanese, and it also sends it to your state Transport Minister, and it pins that photograph and that annotation to a Google map. And you can now see, the public can now see, planning authorities can now see, where cyclists are reporting the black spots. And it's been extremely popular. I got an email this morning from some folk in Queensland who have thanked us because the Black Spot app actually has fed back into a decision to improve a place that people were complaining about, that was dangerous and that was throwing people off their bikes. So the system is actually working. We want 3% of the state transport budget to do this within 15 years. We want $80 million from the Commonwealth transport budget, and then we want to let people get on with the job of building a world-class cycle network for Perth and for other Australian cities. But we do need these dedicated funds. We've got to kick this idea that only serious infrastructure is freeways, railways and ports. There are some signs of hope, although we haven't been able to persuade the Commonwealth to actually provide some money to back these ideas up. But there are some signs of hope. The Major Cities Unit and the people in there I've got very high regard for are conducting or have conducted an active transport study that I think will hopefully once and for all put the evidence base on the Minister's desk and make the case that it's time to get on our bikes. To be able to do that, and Australians want to do that, we need to provide the infrastructure so that parents know their kids are safe when they're on their bikes on the road, and that people can take up in a major way, as they've done in cities all over the world, and remember the joys of the bike.
Thank you, Senator.